You've now suddenly come down on the side of Mr. Boris Johnson, as you like me to call him, defending him. Imagine my shock to see you defending him at the weekend.
No, I have not come down on his side. I've come down against his enemies.
Yes.
It's a different thing.
Quite.
I have never. Well, once you examine it, the old, much touted saw that my enemy's enemy is my friend.
Yes,
it's not true. My enemy's enemy can be my ally because we're against the same thing, but doesn't make him my friend. No, I still disapprove as heartily as ever of Al Johnson and of what he did, and of this government in general, which seems to me to be broadly a fairly left-wing government, a kind I don't like. But I see that the attack on him at the moment, which is largely orchestrated by the BBC, which, as we know, is the Central Committee of the Liberal Revolution, is one which I have to oppose. And it was very, very sharply and clearly summed up, the nature of it, by this extraordinary tweet which the Labour Party put out, which I hope I gave quite a lot of publicity to.
Yes, you did.
This nurse, supposed to, I would imagine that they've got a real person. I mean, one hopes that they wouldn't invent a person, allegedly called Jenny, saying how she prevented a husband from seeing his dying wife for the general good. And I think that this sums up the problem that, although terrible as the Johnson government is, the useless opposition lying in wait to take over if he goes, and they will be the beneficiaries if he goes, is even worse. And it's most unwise for people to join in this pylon against Johnson, because the pylon only benefits Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer's party puts out this tweet which appears to endorse what seems to me to be one of the most ruthless, zealous actions of the whole lot.
Well, what I found
how could you do that?
Well, like you, I found it astonishing that they thought that actually that was a good tweet to put out, because basically it showed how terrible Boris Johnson was, when in fact all it did was it showed how awful the individual nurse was.
Well, again, not awful. I had an aunt who was a nurse, and she. I still look back with admiration at her life, which was one of considerable courage and hard work and self-sacrifice and many other things. And I like nurses in general, though they're not what they were. And I can see how somebody who believed in the common good could be deluded into imagining that keeping a husband from seeing his dying wife was a good act. I don't want to attack her. Given the level of the fear propaganda which was going on at the time, it's understandable that somebody might be compelled. This is what happens to people. All the people who do the terrible things in utopias where in the end they turn into concentration camp states, they're all people who believe that they're doing good. The most terrifying sort of tyranny in the world is, as C.S. Lewis says, is the sort where the people in charge think they're doing you good. So but surely that doesn't excuse the act, though, Peter, does it? No, it doesn't. The act is wrong. But this is part of the Christianity. You separate the act from the person. You can condemn the act without condemning the person. I think we should be as careful as we can to do that as much as possible.
Yes, but I think in the case of looking back at what went wrong and how we ended up where we are, and something that you railed against ever since the beginning of it, the lockdowns, the draconian measures that were put into place, I think we have to, at the very least, separate the act from the individual by all means, but we need to find who was the person that made that decision that was a good idea.
But, the person who took the decision under an enormous amount of pressure at a time, and we remember this, when the country was in a frenzy of fear about a disease whose importance I still believe it greatly overestimated. And the government was actively engaged in spreading that fear and in getting people to be more and more afraid. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if that fear spread into NHS staff. After all, there they were in hospitals where they were seeing people who were obviously genuinely ill. They must have feared that this thing, given what the government was telling them, given what the modelers were telling them, they must have feared that this thing would become a general plague, slaying millions.
Yeah. And yet,
once you've got that idea in your head, you can turn to a husband and say, it doesn't matter whether you cry or beg or plead, I'm not letting you see your dying wife. I can imagine people doing that. It's not impossible. The crucial thing about the tweet is not that she did that. It's that the Labour Party puts this case into a tweet as what it believes to be part of an argument against the Johnson government. In fact, it's an argument against the Labour Party, because what they're doing is they are, I think, by picking this case, they're saying we actually endorse this sort of behaviour. They haven't, in all the time that this thing has been out and been attacked, they haven't at any time that I've yet seen said, oh, we didn't mean that, we didn't like what Jenny did. I think we can rather assume, given the stony-faced attitude they've had throughout the panic, that this is something which they would ultimately support. It is in their nature. They are zealots.
Yes, they are. And in fact, we know one thing about the Labour Party, in that they would have had the same exact regulations in place. In fact, the regulations might have been worse had they been in charge, because they always backed the same government regulations and restrictions, except they said they should have been made earlier and they should have been harder. And so, is it not possible, though, Peter, that there will be another beneficiary if Boris Johnson is removed, and that will be the Tory party and the country, because there's no chance, I don't think, that there's going to be a general election anytime soon. Keir Starmer, I don't think, would win it anyway. Surely we just get a better Prime Minister, don't we?
Well, you say that, but I'm not sure who it is you're referring to.
Well, I refer to anyone who will not be as bad as Boris Johnson, basically.
Well, okay. Again, I take your point. But the reason why Johnson became leader of the Conservative Party is because he had, and to some extent still retains, a certain magic. He appealed to people which the Conservative Party wouldn't normally appeal to. And look at them. Look at that range of extinct volcanoes called the Conservative Front Bench. Look at them. Who are they? Which of them would be more likely than him to defeat Sir Keir Starmer at the next election? Or my nightmare, the next election, actually the Tories will face a revived Blair creature.
Yes. I think the interesting thing here is that one of Keir Starmer's strengths is that he's not Boris Johnson. If you put somebody else against him, he doesn't have that anymore. He doesn't occupy the moral high ground that Boris Johnson doesn't occupy, because everyone assumes now that he's just a liar and a twister and somebody who will do anything to save his own skin. If Keir Starmer's up against somebody equally, shall we say, high-minded, then he doesn't have the upper hand.
Yeah, but remember, Sir Keir does not have to win the next election. In fact, he almost certainly can't. He just has to win enough seats to form an alliance with Nicola Sturgeon.
God help us.
Well, you say that, and you will say that when it happens. But that's all he needs to do. And it wouldn't take much of a decline in the Tory vote for that to be the case. So, I say, you can be against a Starmer-Sturgeon coalition, or whatever they call it when it comes, without being a friend or defender or ally or liker of Al Johnson.
Yes.
So I'm not defending Al Johnson. I'm saying, watch out. If you toss Johnson in the dustbin, it may give you a huge sense of pleasure and delight to do so. But once he's in the dustbin, it may not be long before you see Keir Starmer cozying up to Nicola Sturgeon.
But are you not, though, Peter? Are you not now, Peter, guilty of a gross dereliction of your principles, though? Because you're now saying that a man who you have absolutely no time for, no respect for, who you don't think has done a very good job, and who is in fact responsible for some of the worst decisions ever made in the history of politics, should stay on. For how long?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that's a dereliction of principle. What I've always said, or not always, but for about the past 250 years, I've said about the Conservative Party is that they're useless, and that there is no substantial difference between them and the Labour Party, and in some ways they're even worse, which I stick by. But in this specific instance, where what we have is basically an argument about whether the fanaticism and zealotry and authoritarianism of the COVID panic was good, or whether it's actually run its course, was probably a mistake and should be got rid of, then I think I have to be, at the very least, defend the second of those two courses against the first. And I think every sane person does, however much I loathe the Tories. I don't want to give strength and power and indeed office to a government containing two people who've been throughout this whole thing committed to being even more stringent, not merely burning down their own house to get rid of a wasp nest, but burning down everybody else's houses too. And that's what, Starmer and Sturgeon, look at the two of them. Throughout the whole thing, they've wanted more restrictions, longer restrictions, earlier restrictions, more devastating, damaging restrictions. This morning I saw that a favourite cafe of mine in Oxford had closed. And I know, because this has been in prospect for some time, I know that this is exactly because of these stupid restrictions which were imposed upon it. It was a thriving, happy business which people liked using and which was making its owners a good income out of providing a service people wanted, and it's been killed. Not by COVID, as the BBC would say, but by the stupidity of the restrictions imposed. And this isn't just one thing. There's hundreds, probably thousands of these instances all over the country. I'm sick of it and of all the other stuff. So if I'm faced with a political confrontation between the people who are still in favour of that sort of rubbish and someone who seems to be going off it, then what do you do?